The heavy rain pelted against the windows of the small law office as attorney Michael Dawson shuffled through the last of the estate documents. He sighed, rubbing his temples. It had been a long night. This was supposed to be a routine probate case. The late Margaret Holloway, a 76-year-old retired schoolteacher, had left behind a modest estate, a house, a few bank accounts, and some personal belongings. But then, he found it. A sealed envelope, yellowed with age, tucked inside a locked metal box. The handwriting on the front was delicate, almost shaky, as if written by someone in distress. The words sent a chill down his spine. To be opened 30 years after my death. It holds the truth they tried to bury. Michael hesitated. The box had been hidden behind old tax records, untouched for decades. His heart pounded as he reached for a letter opener. As the envelope peeled open, a stack of brittle papers slid out. And as he began to read, his breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a will. It was a confession. July 4th, 1994, Holloway residence. The sleepy town of Crescent Falls had never seen much crime. But on that sweltering summer night, something unspeakable happened. Clara Evans, a 19-year-old college freshman, had gone missing. She had been seen last at Margaret Holloway's home, where she worked as a part-time caretaker. The next morning, Clara was gone. Vanished without a trace. Authorities conducted a full investigation, questioning Margaret and searching the property. But nothing was found. No signs of a struggle. No forced entry. No body. The case went cold. And for 30 years, Clara Evans remained missing. Until now. Because inside that letter, Margaret Holloway had written down exactly what happened that night. And the truth was worse than anyone could have imagined. The ink on the letter was faded, but the words cut like a knife. To whoever finds this, if I am gone, then I must finally speak the truth. Clara Evans didn't run away. She was murdered. And I know because I helped cover it up. Michael's hands shook as he continued reading. Margaret detailed that on the night of July 4th, Clara had gotten into an argument with Margaret's son, Andrew Holloway. Andrew, a troubled 22-year-old with a history of violent outbursts, had been drinking heavily that night. The fight escalated. And then, Clara was dead. It was an accident, Margaret wrote. But Andrew panicked. He begged me to help. And like a fool, I did. I helped my son bury the truth. Michael swallowed hard. Margaret had lied to the police. She had destroyed evidence. And worst of all, I know where Clara's body is. Michael felt his blood turn to ice. Because Margaret had left directions. The letter ended with a chilling set of instructions. A place deep in the Holloway family property. Near the old well. She's still there, Margaret wrote. Waiting to be found. Michael's head spun. Clara Evans had been missing for 30 years. And if this letter was true, her body had been right there all along. Michael grabbed his phone. His fingers hovered over the numbers for the police. But then, a noise outside. A shadow moved past his window. Someone was watching. Someone didn't want the secret coming out. His breath caught. Because suddenly, he realized something horrifying. Andrew Holloway was still alive. And if his mother had hidden this letter for 30 years, what else had she been hiding? The office suddenly felt too small, the walls too close. Michael Dawson gripped the yellowed confession letter in his trembling hands, his mind racing. For 30 years, the town of Crescent Falls had believed that Clara Evans simply disappeared. But Margaret Holloway's letter had changed everything. She had lied to the police. She had helped bury the evidence. And now, her own words had exposed the gruesome truth. Clara wasn't missing. She had been murdered. And if Margaret was telling the truth, her body was still buried near the old well. Michael swallowed hard. This wasn't just an estate case anymore. This was a crime scene. He reached for his phone, ready to call the authorities. But then, he saw it again. The shadow outside his window. Someone was watching him. Someone who didn't want the secret getting out. Michael didn't sleep that night. By morning, he had made his decision. This wasn't just about a case, this was about justice. He took the letter straight to the Crescent Falls Police Department. Detective Sarah Whitmore read through the fragile pages, her face a mixture of disbelief and grim understanding. "If this is real," she muttered, "we're looking at a murder cover-up spanning 3 decades. Margaret Holloway is dead, Michael reminded her. But her son, Andrew, he's still out there. Whitmore nodded. Then we better find out what he's hiding. That afternoon, officers secured a search warrant for the Holloway estate, the same house where Clara was last seen alive. And as they dug into the old well, the truth finally surfaced. The air grew thick as shovels hit dirt. Michael stood back, watching as forensic teams carefully removed soil. Hours passed. Then, a scream. A worker staggered back, his face pale. Because sticking out of the damp earth was bone. A human skull. Michael's stomach twisted. For 3 decades, Clara had been hidden beneath their feet. And now, she has finally been found. Detective Whitmore stepped forward, her voice tense. This just turned into a homicide case. But before anyone could process what had just happened, a gunshot rang out. Michael hit the ground as officers scrambled for cover. More shots echoed through the property, bullets slamming into trees. "Sniper!" someone shouted. Panic erupted as police tried to pinpoint the shooter. Then, a voice. Low. Calm. And dripping with rage. "You should have left the past buried." Michael's blood turned to ice. Andrew Holloway. Somewhere in the dense woods, Margaret's son was watching them. And he was ready to kill to keep his mother's secret. Michael's breath came in sharp gasps. This wasn't just about Clara anymore. This was about survival. Bullets whizzed past, forcing officers to take cover. Andrew was hunting them. And with the dense woods surrounding the Holloway estate, he had the upper hand. Michael pressed himself against the dirt, heart pounding. If Andrew had already killed once, what was stopping him from doing it again? Michael knew one thing for sure. He had to get out of here. But then, he felt something cold against his neck. A barrel. And the last thing he heard was Andrew Holloway's voice. "You should have walked away." A deep cold metal pressed against Michael Dawson's neck. His pulse thundered in his ears. The once quiet estate was now a war zone, flashing police lights, the lingering scent of disturbed earth, and the thick, suffocating silence as Andrew Holloway stood behind him, gun in hand. "You should have walked away," Andrew repeated, his voice a deadly whisper. Michael could barely breathe. His mind raced. He had no weapon, no way to fight back. The police were scattered, pinned down by gunfire. No one was coming to save him. Andrew gripped his collar, pulling him close. "People should learn to mind their own damn business," he muttered, his breath hot against Michael's ear. Michael forced himself to stay calm. This man had been hiding a murder for 30 years. If he was willing to kill Clara Evans, what was stopping him from pulling the trigger now? Then, Michael saw it. A small blade strapped to Andrew's belt. It was a long shot. But it was his only shot. Michael acted fast. He threw his weight back, slamming his elbow into Andrew's ribs. The gunshot roared, but Michael had already twisted away. Pain burned across his shoulder, grazed, but still alive. Before Andrew could recover, Michael lunged for the blade. His fingers wrapped around the handle, yanking it free. Andrew swung the gun up again. But this time, Michael was faster. With every ounce of strength, he drove the blade deep into Andrew's arm. Andrew screamed, dropping the gun. Michael didn't hesitate. He ran. Bullets whizzed past him, hitting tree bark and shattering glass. He didn't look back. All that mattered was survival. Michael burst through the woods, heart hammering, lungs screaming for air. He didn't stop until he reached the road, until he saw the flashing police lights ahead. Shots fired. Shots fired. Detective Whitmore's voice rang out through the radio. Officers rushed forward, weapons drawn. "He's in the woods!" Michael gasped. "Andrew Holloway, he tried to kill me." Whitmore's eyes hardened. "We end this. Now." The police moved in, vanishing into the trees. Michael stumbled back, pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder. His mind swirled with everything that had happened. The letter. The well. The bones. The lies. It all came back to one simple truth. Andrew Holloway had been hiding a secret for 30 years. But why? And more importantly, who else knew? The next morning, the town of Crescent Falls was in shock. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. Everyone had believed Clara Evans simply ran away. Now, they knew she had been murdered. And Andrew Holloway? He was still missing. Despite the police search, he had vanished into the woods. Whitmore sat across from Michael in the police station, flipping through old case files. "We got something," she finally said, sliding a photograph across the table. Michael frowned. It was a black and white picture of a young woman, Clara Evans, and beside her, standing with his arm around her waist, a younger Andrew Holloway. Michael's stomach dropped. They knew each other? Whitmore nodded grimly. "Not just knew each other," she said. "They were engaged." Michael felt his breath catch. "Then why would he kill her?" Whitmore's expression darkened. "That," she said, "is what we're about to find out." But before either of them could speak, a call came in over the radio. "We have movement at the Holloway estate. Suspect may be returning to the scene." Michael's blood ran cold. Andrew Holloway was back. And this time, he had nothing left to lose. The Holloway estate stood silent beneath the darkening sky. Michael and Whitmore arrived just as officers surrounded the property. A shadow moved across an upstairs window. Andrew was inside. "We end this now," Whitmore said. Michael exhaled slowly. Everything was coming to a head. The past, the secrets, the sins buried in the ground. This was it. As officers prepared to move in, the front door creaked open. And there, standing in the doorway, was Andrew Holloway. A bloodstained knife in one hand, a gun in the other, and a smirk on his face. "Took you long enough," he said. Then, the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the house. And all hell broke loose. The Holloway estate plunged into darkness. The power had been cut, or maybe Andrew had planned this. Michael Dawson's heart pounded. Shadows twisted across the walls as officers moved into the house, their flashlights slicing through the suffocating black. Then, a gunshot shattered the silence. Someone screamed. A crash. A scuffle. Then another shot. Michael pressed against the wall, his breath shaky. Andrew Holloway was here. Armed. Dangerous. And he had nothing left to lose. "Fan out," Detective Whitmore ordered. "Take him alive if possible." Possible. That was the key word. Michael knew how this ended. Andrew would never let himself be caught. Not after 30 years of secrets. Not after everything he'd done to keep Clara Evans buried. Michael stepped carefully through the halls, listening. A creaking sound from upstairs. Then, footsteps. He turned a corner and froze. Andrew Holloway stood at the top of the grand staircase. A gun in one hand, a knife in the other. His eyes were wild, unhinged. "Do you even know what you've done?" Andrew whispered, his voice eerily calm. Michael kept his hands up. "It's over, Andrew." Andrew laughed. A hollow, empty sound. "Over?" He shook his head. "No. It's never over. Not for me." He took a slow step down the stairs. Michael didn't move. "I loved her, you know," Andrew continued. "More than anything." Michael felt his stomach tighten. "Then why did you kill her?" For a moment, Andrew didn't speak. Then, with a bitter smile, he said, "Because she was going to destroy me." The house seemed to hold its breath. Michael stared at him. "Destroy you?" Andrew's fingers tightened around the knife. Clara was pregnant. The words hit like a punch to the chest. "She wanted to leave, to tell the world who I really was," Andrew murmured. "She thought she could just run off, raise my child, expose me for the fraud I was." His voice shook. "I couldn't let that happen." Michael felt rage coil in his stomach. "So you killed her," he said. Andrew's eyes darkened. "I didn't mean to," he said quietly. "We argued. She said things she shouldn't have. I tried to stop her, she fell. Hit her head." His gaze lifted to meet Michael's. "I buried her because I loved her." Michael's blood boiled. "You don't kill the people you love." Andrew tilted his head. "Don't you?" Then, he moved. Andrew lunged. Michael barely had time to react before the knife slashed past his face. He dodged, stumbling back, knocking over a side table. Andrew was fast. Too fast. Michael saw the gun rise. A flash of metal. Bang! Andrew jerked back, his face contorted in shock. His gun clattered to the floor. A red stain blossomed across his chest. Behind him, Detective Whitmore lowered her weapon. "Drop the knife, Andrew." For a moment, Andrew just stood there. Then, slowly, his knees buckled. He collapsed, his breath ragged. "Clara," he whispered. And then, he was still. It was over. After 30 years, Clara Evans had finally been found. The town of Crescent Falls mourned a woman they had forgotten, but never truly lost. Michael Dawson sat at his desk days later, staring at the letter that started it all. Clara's words felt heavier now. "If someone finds this, please don't let me be forgotten. I want the world to know the truth." Michael exhaled. She wasn't forgotten. And now, she had justice. He closed the letter. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, like a voice from the past finally at peace.